Good afternoon. Bon après-midi. Hello, everyone. We're going to get started. Good afternoon, bon après-midi. My name is Christina Tessier. I'm the Director General here at the Canada Science and Technology Museum, and I'll be your MC for today's event. Veuillez noter que cet événement est traduit simultanément.
Please note that this event is being simultaneously translated, and we invite our French viewers to watch and ask questions on our French live stream page, facebook.com/ScienceTechCanada.
Today, we're going to start with some presentations, followed by a question and answer session, followed by questions from you for our panel. So I'll ask our three panelists just to stand up and wave: Stacey Goulding, Adam Shoalts, and Jesse Rogerson. We'd like to welcome you all to the museum today for this Talk Energy Week live stream. So I know we have students here today from, and let me hear you, Gloucester? Anyone? Mother Teresa? A little bit louder. Colonel By? And SRB, Sir Robert Borden. I went to Confed, so you guys were my nemesis back in high school. All right. I want to begin by acknowledging that we're gathered today on the traditional territory of the Algonquin peoples. To get started, here's a bit of context for this live stream. Talk Energy Week is a national energy awareness program devoted to people learning and talking about how we produce and consume energy and how our energy use affects climate change. Climate change, as we can see by having a week of rain in the middle of February and shutting down Winterlude today. So this is part of the museum's multi-year Let's Talk Energy initiative based at Ingenium, Canada's Museums of Science and Innovation. It aims to promote an informed discussion on energy and climate change with all Canadians. Au cours des 4 dernières années, nous avons organisé des activités dans
Over the last 4 years, we've organized events in all the provinces and reached more than 4 million Canadians.
They're going to chat with us about energy in our lives and how that energy is impacting our climate. It's my hope that all of you will leave today knowing something new and maybe a little bit more connected to the energy that runs through your life. I'm now going to invite each speaker to come up. They're going to introduce themselves, tell us a little bit about their work and their background during their presentations. Let's start with Stacey.
Lao, Stacey Goulding, Tel Squee, Talit Sakwa, Lacamo First Nation. I'm from Lacamo First Nation. I'm a member there. It's located in British Columbia. And I have to say how excited I am today to be speaking to future leaders. I don't get an opportunity to do that, but really the future is in your hands. So thank you so much for coming out and having an interest in this area. I'm going to speak to what I do for my community, but also other communities within BC. And I think that there's a slideshow. There we go. So setting the stage for the future. Next slide. So Lacamo First Nation is my community, and I do have some pictures that will show what I've been doing in my community. So what I do is I work to identify the values and the goals of our community members and incorporate into guiding documents that guide the work both my leaders and us as staff do for our community. So these are just examples of community engagement that we do where we bring the people where they can identify how they want to reduce our impacts on climate change. Here is just a list of what those people have offered and the information that they provide me to go forward and do my work. So you'll notice that my people are talking about clean energy. They're talking about energy efficiency. They're talking about environmental management and conserving water and recycling. They're talking about all these things. It's amazing when you listen to our people, the knowledge that they're able to provide. Now there's going to be a bunch of arrows that you can click through because I've just spoken to each of them. All right, and then the Schultz Nation, another community in our traditional territory. We bring the youth, we bring the elders, and they again provide us the information that leads us to the work that we pursue. So in this nation, they again talked about environmental management. They talked about housing strategies that focus on environmentally friendly homes and energy efficiency. They talked about alternative energy sources. It's amazing the value that they hold within. Next slide. The Katzie First Nation are starting to work on an environmental management plan that will include promoting environmentally friendly development, developing laws that work to protect our environment, and promote partnerships that work to restore Telktumuk, which is Mother Earth, what we all held so sacred and we all recognize as being one with each of us. Next slide. So partnerships, this is where I see all of you coming in. It is so important that people like yourselves bring the knowledge and the capacity to our community members. You work with us so we can pursue projects that help us in our lower carbon futures. Oh, so here, my partner Natasha Cox from the Fraser Valley Watershed Coalition brought in resources that we otherwise don't have access to help remove junk from the streams that used to be or used to act as traditional fishing sites for our people, and right now are in desperate need of being restored. The picture of the youth that are hiding underneath me and Natasha there, we make sure that we bring them into the projects because they too are the future. They are future leaders. So opportunity. These partners bring opportunity to my people. This is Eric Still, a community member who was not employed in this work previous to entering in on this project, but now has the capacity to test all of the streams throughout our traditional territory, identifying the potential for renewable energy projects that our territory holds. Here, Eric Still is collecting water quality data and fish data to help us pursue the restoration that those traditional fishing sites require. Along with him, 2 other members that our partners were able to utilize to learn and build the capacity. But not only that, these partners have learned from our members how to navigate our lands, which cuts down on the time to create these successful projects. Building future leaders. That is my job. I work on building leaders in my community. Here, I have Leilani Diablo. She is working to build future leaders in our youth. Here is what she created, a youth council. The youth council are participating in a science fair where they're learning about renewable energy. This here, they built a solar car. And I wish I had the video to show you guys, but the excitement in their voices is something else. So right now, we're preparing these future leaders to work with you future leaders to build projects that will help Telktumuk. What you can do when you come into our communities with the education that you are receiving right now is you can inspire our people. You can motivate our people. You can listen. Make sure you listen. Their knowledge can get you to your goal so much quicker. Teach, build the capacity, bring in resources, and boots on the ground. We need people. We don't have many people in our communities because of the ramifications of the past. Many of our people were taken from our reserves, but now they've grown and they have their families, and now we have to encourage them to come back home so we can have the human capacity to move forward. Be that someone. We all have warriors within. It sometimes takes that certain someone to bring that warrior out. Thank you. I would like to have Adam Shoalts, a Canadian explorer, please come up to the stage.
Thank you. Just bear with me for a moment as I figure out the technology at the Science and Technology Museum. Maybe this one? No. Ah, you see? This is the nice thing about doing a presentation at a science and technology museum. You never have to worry about the slideshow not working like you do when you do some other presentations. But that's me. That's what I normally look like. My name's Adam Shoalts. I'm a fellow of the Royal Canadian Geographical Society. I do expeditions to the far corners of Canada and sometimes beyond. And I really enjoy canoeing. And let's see, especially rivers that are very isolated, very remote, hundreds of kilometers from the nearest road, house, town, settlement, mine, anything like that. Rivers like this one on the screen here, I always think it looks almost like an anaconda, the way it meanders across the landscape there. So I like to canoe these rivers. I make maps of them. I find waterfalls, that sort of thing, for the Royal Canadian Geographical Society, whose flag I'm holding there. I really enjoy mucking around in the bogs and the swamps and climbing mountains. This sort of thing is my bread and butter, I guess you would say. And the other thing I'm really passionate about is photographing the wildlife I meet with on my travels, wolves, moose, fox, Hudsonian godwit. I bet you guys didn't see that one coming. You're like, centipedes and millipedes. This is a little further afield. This wasn't in Canada. This was down in the Amazon jungle. And I guess this past year, 2017, I decided to put all my passions together, my love of wildlife, canoeing, mucking around in the swamps and climbing mountains, into one great journey that I wanted to make across much of northern Canada. I figured I would try to cross about 4,000 kilometers of Canada's Arctic alone. And I didn't know exactly how long the journey would take, around 4 to 5 months, I figured. And I wanted to do it entirely under my own power, on foot and by canoe. So poling through the ice, paddling through the ice, and more paddling through the big waves. I mean, that's the amazing thing about our new technology. I guess if I'd done this presentation just 15 years ago, I wouldn't have this picture because it was taken by a GoPro inside a waterproof case, which I left recording as I was paddling there. So that's a little bit about myself. I'm also the author of a few books, Alone Against the North, the story of my adventures, and a brand new book called The History of Canada in 10 Maps. We're going to be talking more on the stage and answering your questions. But if you're curious about the kind of adventures and expeditions I do and you want to know more, you can find me on Facebook. I have a page. There it is, Adam Shoalts, or you can check out my website. So thank you very much. And next, you're going to hear from Jesse. So pretty interesting stuff. Okay.
Oh, there we go. Hi, everyone. Thanks for sitting and listening. I'm coming at this from a different angle, I think. So I'm Jesse. I work at the Aviation and Space Museum. So we're under the same corporation as this museum, the Canada Science and Tech Museum. We're under an Ingenium, along with Ag and Food. And I'm a science advisor. So I'm a scientist. I'm an astronomer, actually. I did some grad work in astrophysics, and I spent my entire life sort of researching space. So that was my life up until a little while ago when I transitioned into more of a science communication career. I still do a little bit of research, learning about space, but I also have built a career that's surrounding teaching about it, learning about space, learning about and educating, communicating the science that we've learned, because that's just as important as learning the science itself. You need to communicate it out to the world so that people like you can do things with the facts that we learn. And astronomy, astrophysics, and space sciences has a really interesting view on energy and climate change, and I'm going to sort of take you through my logic on this. And first of all, you've seen this before, right? That's the International Space Station. Later this year, there's a Canadian who's going to launch to there. Does anybody know who it is? Yeah, at least one of you. Canadian astronaut Davis Saint-Jacques, some of you probably knew. He's going to be launching to the International Space Station, and it's like the ultimate remote community. It's six people. They live in the complete vacuum of space. They have only what they have on board, and you can see that that square footage of the International Space Station is like 90% solar panels. And just to put this in perspective, if you were to bring that back down to Earth, it would sit just snugly on the field that the Red Blacks play on. So it's about the size of a football field. It's massive, and most of it is solar panels and square footage, and that's how they get their energy. All of the energy comes from there. They also do a lot of fun things like recycling water. You can think about that for a second. Yeah, okay. So this is the ultimate remote community, and if you want to live in a really remote place, you need to think about how your energy needs are being dealt with. So that's one way of looking at energy from a space point of view. And it's also gets that's only 400 kilometers away on its shortest distance. If the ISS passed over us, it'd be about 400 kilometers away. So it's really not that far. But further out into space, there's some other cool things going on. Like on the left over there is the Voyager space probe. It was launched back in 1977. Yeah, it was a little while ago. And it doesn't have solar panels, but we're still talking to it. It's using a radiothermal nuclear generator. So it's using nuclear power to still talk to us for billions of kilometers away. And just on the right here is a much newer spacecraft called New Horizons that launched back in 2004, I think it was, and it went out to Pluto. You remember when it flew by Pluto a couple years ago? Some of you maybe? No? Okay. I'm the only one who nerds out about space. But New Horizons also has a nuclear power on board, and it's still going, and it's going to actually be visiting some comets out in the Kuiper Belt, so it's still going too. And I think one of the more interesting angles on this, so I was talking about remote communities and power generation, but the ability to study space or be in space or work with space means that we can really take a good look at Earth from afar. So this is a global map from the Black Marble project from NASA, and it's just taking a snapshot of Earth at night. So you can't see that you can't see all of Earth at night at once, because half of it is in day and half of it is in night. But this gives you a sense, if you were to stitch a couple of images together, just how much power we're using as communities. And they do this project to track the lighting that we use, to track over time how our energy needs are changing. And sad to report that in the most recent Black Marble image, that the lights that we even though we know that it's a problem to have a ton of lighting and a ton of light going up and creating light pollution and using a lot of energy, we're actually increasing our use. It's either staying the same or increasing. So even though we know climate change is a problem and our energy needs are a problem, we're not really jumping in on that problem right now. And and this is the real interesting thing for me. So looking at Earth is one thing, but the ability to study our solar system has had a really interesting effect on our study of Earth as well. So these are the three sort of most like planets to Earth in our solar system. Well, obviously Earth is Earth, but on the left you have Mars, and on the right you have Venus. And when we started space exploration, one of the very first place we visited was Venus here on the right. And some of you may know that Venus's atmosphere is mostly carbon dioxide, and it's 400 degrees or more on the surface there. And we didn't know that until we went, and it was a proof of concept of what can happen with an atmosphere dominated by carbon dioxide. That's not to take away from the work that climatologists have been doing since the late 1800s and the early 1900s, but studying Venus really helped ferment the science of climate change. And if we didn't go there, we wouldn't have such good perspective on what's going on here. So all of this to say that studying space and understanding space and being in space is really, really good from an energy and climate change point of view. So if you have any more questions about that later on, I can help you out with it. Thanks, and I'll see you up there.
Okay, so amazing. We have an Indigenous leader, Canadian explorer and space scientist, basically. So some very different perspectives on energy and climate change. And I do hope that you will ask questions in a few minutes from all of these amazing folks up here. Before that, we have some questions we're going to ask them directly. So let's talk about energy, and then we can talk a little bit about climate change. We use it every day. We're using it in here, light these lights and shine our projector, and in ways that are constantly changing, including advancements in energy efficiency and renewable energy technology. So when you think about what you're seeing around Canada and around the world today, what excites you in that energy field? And I think you guys have a mic over there, so maybe Stacey, do you want to start? Should be on.
Okay, testing. Oh yeah, hi. What excites me, I guess, is that there is opportunity out there for the goals and the values that our community members have displayed in our engagement sessions to be reached, and that there are individuals like these guys that are going out and pursuing this type of work and these type of technologies who can then come into our communities and ensure that these goals can be reached.
Great. And so the idea of partnerships with our Indigenous peoples and Canadians and our new leaders that are becoming out of our high schools and our universities, and the idea that they can come and work with you in your communities to make change.
Yes, that's right.
Adam, how about you?
Well, having just canoed across 4,000 kilometers of Canada's Arctic, and thinking a lot about energy in Canada's northern communities and ways that it could be more sustainable. One thing that's coming down the pipeline, I don't know if that's the best metaphor, but is wind energy in the Canadian Arctic. This is a new development, and in some ways here in Canada we're kind of playing catch up with the Americans over in Alaska, where they've had wind turbines producing renewable energy in remote communities there for the past decade. But in Canada, we're just starting to get into it in Canada's Arctic. I mean, obviously we have wind farms in southern Canada, but parts of Canada's Arctic, as I can tell you from having canoed across, can be pretty windy. And that wind, obviously, if we can harness it to provide relatively clean energy for many of these communities, that'll be a big improvement over the diesel that many of these communities are currently relying upon. So that's something that I'm excited about to see, hopefully coming in the future, the near future. Mm-hmm.
From my point of view as a space scientist, in terms of excitement, I'm really interested in spin-off technology. So NASA has been known for this, CSA has been known for this, that they dump tons of time and effort and people into researching things to get us into space, and then they learn, because of that, we've learned how to do things that we didn't know how to do before. Like all of your cell phones can be rooted back to the space race back in the 60s. Like that, computers didn't exist when we went to space in the 60s. And it's a result of that R&D, that research development time, that brought that to something that we use all the time. So thinking about like the energy needs on the ISS and how that might spin off to technologies for remote communities, or if we're going to inhabit Mars one day permanently, how that research might spin off to be used on Earth at some point. So there's a lot of interesting technology that's being worked on, and seeing how that'll filter down into our everyday use at some point in the future is really interesting.
Great. Thanks, everyone. So if we turn our attention to climate change, and we know that a changing climate is going to have different effects on different parts of our country, different parts of our world, when you take a look at that, the greatest challenges, the opportunities that climate change and moving to a low-carbon future provide for Canadians? When we think about our audience that's here today and our audience that's listening on Facebook, what are some of the small steps we can each take individually to have a positive change on our environment?
Well, in some of the examples on the slide, our community members are speaking to composting programs and recycling, reducing and reusing, but also harnessing renewable energy technologies to help support a lower carbon future when we're building the homes to bring our community members back home. I think in terms of climate change and adapting or preparing for climate change, there was something that both, is it Adam or David? What's your name again? I'm sorry. Jesse. Sorry. Yeah, we are. No, Jesse and I were talking about potential for identifying where wildfires might spark up. So I'm from BC, and last year was the worst year recorded on record for forest fires. And a lot of our community members or communities are like are located in remote areas, within the forest or around forested areas. And so technologies that can identify these things and have emergency responders coming on to address them before they start to occur are things that can help our communities prepare for what might be to come.
Well, actually, to build off what Stacey said, I don't know if you caught it, but I was looking at her one slide there, and it was the list from the community of green initiatives they could do, and I saw one thing on that list that I'm really excited about. It said grow veggies. And I think growing some of your own food in a backyard garden, or even if you don't have a backyard and you live in an apartment, you can still grow food like onions and tomatoes and things with just the light from a window. This is something that, the older generation, maybe your grandparents, took for granted. Everyone used to do it back in the old days, but it kind of fell out of favor towards the end of the 20th century, and it kind of became less common. But it's making a comeback now, and it's an amazingly simple yet satisfying thing that we can all do. Growing a little bit of your food, obviously you can't grow it all, but growing more food in your backyard or wherever, that's really good for the environment, rather than having to buy everything that comes from far away, gets trucked in or on a plane or something. Just simple steps like that, if we all do it, can add up to some pretty big impacts. So that's something that excites me a lot. Mm-hmm.
And it always tastes better when you grow it yourself, right?
Yeah, we have me and my girlfriend, we're like 15 floors up. We do tomatoes and we do various little herbs and stuff. Super easy to do. You just have to water a little bit and you're good to go. Yeah. Challenges though, I wonder from your perspective, or maybe from both of your perspectives, I'm an astronomer, and I had no idea that light pollution was a problem until I became an astronomer. The more light there is in a city, the further away from that city I have to get to before I can look at the sky properly. So for me, it was like I had to get into something to see that it was an actual problem. And we all come from a different place here, but I live in the middle of Ottawa, in the middle of it, and so I don't interact with nature very often. I see a challenge, maybe a challenge for all of us, is that we just don't interact with nature enough to actually see that there's problems happening. You two seem to live in a more remote than I do, so you may have your finger on it a little bit more. Do you think that maybe, I'm now asking you questions, or maybe we all just need to get out to see nature more? I don't know.
I know with a lot of the projects and the great partners that I've been able to work with and that have worked with my community, we include engagement sessions where we get the kids out on the land, learning about the land and the issues while we're out on the land. And I think that really helps, because then they're getting that connection back again, because a lot of things, everything seems to be in the classrooms, but you're starting to see this movement into outdoor educational facilities. I know that we started partnering with one of the schools in our community, an elementary school, and they are working on developing an outdoor education facility. So I think it is important, and I think it's starting to become a common practice to get people out there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's critical that everyone experience wild nature. And I don't know if we have to build video games about canoeing and camping to get people into it, but here in Ottawa is pretty special. It's a national capital. And yet less than, I'm going to say, 75 kilometers radius from the heart of downtown Ottawa, we still have moose over in the Laurentians. We have black bears. We even have some wolves. There aren't very many national capitals left in the world where that's the case. Within a 75-kilometer radius, you can still find large species of wild animals in the wild. I mean, you go through the 200-odd nation states with a seat at the UN, you can't find too many. And I think that's really important to Canada and to the national capital region, that we make sure that it stays like that, so that when you guys grow up, you can still leave the city of Ottawa and find these wild places almost at your doorstep. And I know that there's the green belt around the city of Ottawa, but there's still a lot of development pressures. Cities expand, populations grow. So that's something that, maybe you want to talk more about your teachers afterwards, and what you can do in terms of municipal politics here in Ottawa, making sure that those green spaces are protected, so that we still have, almost from like the heart of downtown Ottawa, wilderness visible just across the river or within our sight lines. So even if you're working at the total end of the spectrum, you're a computer programmer, you can kind of still look out your window, at least at lunch, and see it there, and let it remind you, and it kind of stays in your heart, and we care about it, and we're inspired to want to protect these places so that they are there for future generations. So I think that is absolutely very important, that we actually do experience it, and then we're inspired to care about it. Okay.
Thanks to all three of you. We'd like to turn the conversation over to you guys and hear your questions for our panels, or if there are stories about what you're doing in your classrooms. Some of the easy things that I think we all know about in terms of eating less meat, public transportation, how we heat our homes. If there's things you're doing in your own lives, we'd like to hear, as well as questions, as I mentioned, for our explorer, our scientists, and our Indigenous leader here. You've got a spectrum of people that can address your questions. You'll see the 2 microphones on either side of the stairs there if you just want to come down and engage with our panelists. And while you're all thinking about your amazing questions, is there one coming? All right, I'll be quiet.
Hi, my name is Edna, and I'm from Colonel By Secondary School. So my first question would be, this is towards you. You mentioned that you believe that Canada is playing a catch-up game to our neighbors down south. Do you believe that it's because of the government's lack of funding towards renewable energy, such as the tech to be able to harvest the wind into energy? So I was reading up on this, and apparently that in the US, if you wanted to buy an electric car, the US would give you $7,500 in tax credit if you wanted to buy that or solar panels. And for solar panels, they give you tax credit covering 30% of the cost. So do you think it's because our government is lacking in funding, and that's the reason that people don't necessarily want to turn towards renewable projects?
Wow. Thank you. That's an excellent question. Very well researched. I can see you've done your homework. I was expecting you to say, what's the scariest animal you've ever come across? But you guys brought your A game today. I can't comment on the specifics of government policies. I know we have some initiatives in Ontario and in Canada for renewable energy. But I mean, I think you bring up some really excellent points there, and that's something that, by all means, you should be encouraged to research further. And, research and advocate for it if you think that the United States is doing better than us. I mean, I think the competition between different countries can be a good thing if it inspires us to want to do a better job of preserving and protecting our environment. Maybe we need almost like an environmental Olympics, which countries can come up with the best initiatives to fight climate change and to protect these wild places. I said that, Canada is kind of playing catch up with the United States, specifically on the issue of wind turbines in cold climates up in the Arctic. They've got a little bit of an edge on us in Alaska, but then on some other areas, I'm sure we're leading the United States when it comes to protecting the environment. So yeah, that's an excellent question. And sorry, I can't comment specifically on the government policies, but I think you're absolutely in the right territory when thinking about those issues and maybe trying to push for greater initiatives to move in that direction. Absolutely. I don't know if anyone else wants to tackle that too.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and it might just be an issue of policy and what the goals of those policies are setting out. Like, I know for me, that's what I have to do too in my job, is seek out funding opportunities so that we can pursue the goals. And I know that there were funds available for technologies, for reaching out to people like yourselves or who you will be when you graduate to help identify technologies or fund technologies, experiments and such, but also energy efficiency. So maybe it's something that needs to be, adjusted in policy to speak more to electric vehicle usage or purchase.
And maybe specifically also, the Department of Natural Resources has a program right now called Generation Energy. They're looking for ideas, just like what you're talking about, to submit directly to them. You're good, you're right. Okay. Just before we take our next question, I just want to remind those of you joining online, you can submit your questions as a comment on the events page. Et je tiens à rappeler aux spectateurs francophones de visiter notre page.
Please go to our Facebook page, therefore, facebook.com/SciTech Canada, to see that this has been interpreted in French, and so has enabled you to ask your questions in French if you wish.
Question.
My name's Sean. I'm Sir Rob Borden. And is climate change a hoax? And why is it China? Hi, Jules.
No.
But why is it China?
So I think the the international conversation now, aside from a few holdouts, has moved beyond the question of whether or not climate change is happening and whether or not humans are doing it. It is happening. Humans are doing it. Beyond that to what we can do. So the real question we should be asking is, how can we start doing something a little like productive in our own communities on a grassroots level, but then also, I like where you're going this last question about pushing our politicians. Politicians work for you. They are voted into office to do the things that we want them to do. So we, en masse, we need to tell them what we want. When it comes to climate change, we need to tell them we want better initiatives in the north. We need to tell them we want driverless cars that use less fuel. We need to tell them we want all of these things, or they're not going to do it. And someone else with a louder voice will get what they want. When it comes to climate change, tell all those people that say hoax that, you know, we're past that now. Yeah.
I'll make sure.
Anybody else want to?
Well, I guess I can just restate what I said in my presentation, or maybe after that, is that last year for BC, it was the worst forest fire season on record. So that is an example of climate change.
So please do come down with your questions. While we're waiting for our next folks to come down, Adam, what was the scariest animal that you ran into in the north?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I didn't have one off the top of my head. Actually, probably what I fear most is not some big, scary animal, but it's the little tiny ones, the mosquitoes and things like that. And I think that comes back to climate change. With warmer temperatures, we're seeing things like Zika, West Nile, with ticks, Lyme disease moving north. You can plot it on a map every year. The disease lines kind of move north. So I actually fear getting bit by a small insect that's carrying a disease far more than I do polar bears or grizzly bears or anything like that. Absolutely.
Terrific. Now we have a lineup. All right, so we'll start here. Introduce yourself and ask your question.
Hi, I'm Athena Victorio, student from Mother Teresa High School. And my question is, what are your opinions about Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's support in continuing to construct the pipeline to pump crude oil in BC?
God, you pass that to me. That's a good question. I don't have a good answer for it. I honestly say I don't know enough about it. The pipelines are oil running through natural resources has a lot of potential to be bad, and a lot of current, and not just potential, it is bad in a lot of ways. There is a societal inertia that we're stuck in, meaning we're stuck in this oil-dependent frame of mind, and that is a challenge that we're dealing with still. I don't know how to comment further than that. So I think that a prime minister who is attempting to reduce the amount of reliance on oil is good. I don't think that a prime minister will be able to turn the tables overnight. The individual pipelines that he selected, him and his cabinet selected in that last round, I couldn't comment on whether or not those ones are the right ones to choose. But I think that attempting to slow it down is a good idea, and I don't think it's going to change overnight. That's a really hard question. That's a good question. Yeah. Anybody else want to?
Oh, goodness. Well, in the work that I've done for the last 9 years, it's all about restoring T'Eltumuk, Mother Earth, and our fish resource. That our people want to practice our traditions, and fishing is, up here. So it's very scary what the implications of pipelines and leaks and such can do to that. But, again, I don't really know too much about it either. I mean, I know I drive a vehicle, right? So there is a need. But at the same time, I'm not sure where we stand. Do we already have a surplus of oil? Do we need more oil? Do we need more pipelines? I'm not sure. I don't know the stats on that. But I do know that my people's culture and their traditions deserve to be protected. So if there's a way to do that, then that's the way I'd want to go.
Good. All right, let's go over to this microphone.
All right. So my question is, recently there was a Bill C-69, which was spearheaded by Catherine McKenna, our Environment Minister. And part one is replacing the Canadian Environment Assessment of 2012 to a new one, which is called the Impact Assessment. And so part of this, my question goes to Stacey, is that it states Indigenous people should be consulted in a meaningful way. And so it's very vague wording, and I wanted to ask you what you think a meaningful manner would mean.
Well, yeah, that is a very good question. I think a meaningful manner would be in such a way where it's not just discussions, but resources are provided so adequate monitoring and enforcing takes place. Because, you know, we can be talking to different proponents that are coming to want to do business on our land, but we don't have the capacity to go out there and make sure that adequate monitoring is taking place and making sure that what's been said is actually taking place. So if those consultations can bring in that type of capacity, then that to me would make sense.
Thank you.
So I'm Grayson from Colonel By Secondary School. My question is to Adam. So when you're like out exploring the Arctic and like mapping the new environments, how do you ensure that you're not actually like harming the wildlife and like you're not disturbing the natural order that's already there?
Well, that's a very good question. And, you know, my policy is, well, actually more than my policy, I guess my heartfelt philosophy is to try to tread as lightly as possible on the earth. So, you know, take really only memories and photographs and leave only footprints. And that's part of the reason why I like to do my journeys alone. So it's just me, there's no one else there, there's no big fancy film crew or other people, because, you know, traveling alone, you have a much more lighter impact on the environment. And I guess that's a problem when you have larger groups of people and you're going into a really fragile environment. You have a dozen people camping in one area. You have to think of the waste and all the rest, and if they're harvesting firewood and all of this. So, you know, I try to be as light as possible in how I live my life and how I go about doing things. Mm-hmm. You won't see me taking a chainsaw out of that backpack and clearing down a little area to put my tent up at night. Nothing like that. So. Mm-hmm.
Thanks. Go ahead.
This is for Adam again. So you spend a lot of time in nature up north and stuff, so I was wondering what kind of things that you've seen, like the impacts of climate change in Canada's wilderness. What kind of things have you seen?
Oh, well, that's a very good question. Actually, part of the idea of my journey alone across Canada's Arctic for 2017 was based on the idea of climate change, that the summers were getting warmer and the ice-free season was getting longer. Because when I first started to plan this journey, I had no idea of whether or not it would be possible to do. You know, I tried Googling canoeing across Canada's Arctic and nothing came up. But I figured, you know, I was looking at the news and I was looking at what was going on with climate change, and I was seeing these record-breaking ice melts. You know, like 2015, 2016, it was like the earliest ice breakups on record. No one had remembered the ice melting on the rivers that early. And that's kind of got the wheels turning in my head, and I thought, well, you know, maybe it'll be possible now because we're having longer summers, and we're having more of an ice-free season for me to actually paddle across this whole 4,000 kilometers in a single summer, which wouldn't have been possible, you know, just a couple generations ago when the winters were much colder. And then I flew up to the Western Arctic to begin my journey in May of 2017, and it turned out to be the latest ice breakup since 1984. But I mean, obviously that's how science works. You can't just choose one anecdote. You have to look at the big picture and lots of data, and the bigger picture is clear of warming temperatures. And some of what I've seen, you asked me what I've seen with my own eyes, is you know, parts of the lowland Arctic around the Arctic Circle, where traditionally hundreds of years ago, that was all tundra, which is very low vegetation, Arctic willow, lichens, and now there's actually black spruce growing there. So the tree line kind of sporadically moving north, which is the result of, on average, warmer temperatures over the last century and a half or so. So that would be an example of what I've seen, where there's trees starting to grow where they weren't there before in the relatively recent past. So yeah, thank you for your very good question.
Go to this mic.
My name's Kyra. I'm from SRB. How can we as how can we help as students or as a community to reduce the effects of climate change and help each other for the future?
Maybe, so initiatives at school, you have there's a lot of you at school, right? You have power in numbers. So there's things like, you have kiss and rides, right? Where you get dropped off in the morning or you get picked up. Right? That's a great place to have like a non-idle zone if you don't already have one. Just to make sure, like, if you're waiting more than 30 seconds to get picked up or dropped off or whatever, then you should be turning your car off and not allowing those CO2 emissions to get out into the atmosphere. Identifying things like that at school that you can take charge of and take leadership on and drive home, that's something you can really, because what that is not only does it make an impact now, it means it gives you practice for the future when you're in a position to have a bigger effect than just on your school. You can get to a position where you can have an effect on a city scale or on a country scale. So I would encourage small little initiatives right now, and they'll get bigger as you grow.
You can still add to that, though.
Okay, well, you know what? Where I learn what to do is actually from my daughter, because happily their school is actually teaching them about energy efficiency. So she's been on me before, and I guess I'll admit it, to keep the fridge door shut, because sometimes I might leave that open. Or, Mom, shut the front door. It's freezing out there. Keeping the lights off. Closing your blinds in the summertime, right? So that you're not having to crank up the air conditioner. That can help keep your house cool. Dressing warmer in your home rather than cranking up the heat in the wintertime. Just a few tidbits from my daughter anyway.
And one of the best things I think you can do at your school that will make a positive impact on the local environment and your own small contribution to addressing climate change is getting the school talking to your principals about planting more trees on the property. I mean, it's amazing how much land is taken up by our schools. And if you look at Google Earth, the satellite image of the city of Ottawa, and you zoom in, you'll quickly see some of the largest acreage in an urban area are schools. And there's a lot of land on the schools where you could actually be planting native tree species, which is great. They produce oxygen, but they also provide habitat for urban wildlife, like local birds. And this is something that is relatively easy to do. Many schools have eco-studies clubs, or you can even do it in your science class. Get on the principal's case, talk to them about it, say, why can't we plant half a dozen white spruce over here, and maybe we can have some sugar maples over here. Why can't we do that? We're not using this at all. Maybe it's growing along the side of the parking lot, and right now it's just grass. No biodiversity, just one species, and we mow it right down with our gasoline-powered mower here. So let's plant some trees. In a garden too, if you don't already have one at your school. I mean, maybe don't go overboard. Start small. Don't be rebellious and start planting the spruce in the middle of the soccer field, because that probably won't go over well. But if you can find a little bit of available land that's unused on your school property, that's a great initiative, great project that you guys can do together. You have to earn your community service hours anyways to graduate, so do something like that, absolutely.
All great ideas. So we have 5 minutes left and 6 questions, so we're going to power through these.
Okay, so my question is basically, a lot of countries are battling climate change differently. So for example, Costa Rica, they try to focus more on the sustainability of the country, of their environment. And I was just wondering, how do you think as individuals, all you have different focuses on climate change, how do you think that, is it more important to focus on the big picture or the smaller picture when combating climate change, do you think?
I definitely think it's meeting in the middle. So one of the things that I speak about to other organizations that have asked me to come talk is reconciliation from the ground up. So we have our leaders going out there and working with governments to provide what's called reconciliation, reconciling with our people because of the past. And so they're working at it up here. But boots on the ground, partnerships that I spoke to in my presentation, working together with non-Indigenous organizations and nonprofit organizations, we're reconciling on the ground. So it's the same way with climate change. Let's meet halfway. Right over here.
So I was doing some quick research in my chair, and I noticed that NASA's budget in 2011 was $18.4 billion, and then the Canadian Space Agency budget in 2015 to 2016 was $483 million. There's a big difference there. I know it's kind of different because of the dollar exchange, but do you think the fact that we don't invest enough in our space program affects our ability to develop technology to reduce climate change?
Yeah, but there's also another piece to that. It's a population difference. So they're about 10 times bigger, so their budgets are usually about 10 times bigger as well. So the difference in budget, you also have to pull in the population. But you're absolutely right. CSA in general could absolutely benefit from more funding, and that funding would have direct impact environmentally. A ton of NASA's budget is Earth observation and work on Earth. There's a lot of money is spent to send probes to planets and the International Space Station and human spaceflight and all that, but space is such a great vantage point, and Canada already has, like, we have some cool satellites that are working, like RadarSat, Constellation and stuff like this that are working on it, but more money means better solutions, more information, more solutions. Yeah.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm Grace from Gloucester High School, and I'm Inuit. I come from the Arctic, right? And the sea ice is melting at a rapid rate, and I was just wondering, because of that, there's a huge possibility of cruise ships going to the Arctic and, disrupting the creatures that live there, the people. So I was wondering, what do you think that we as Canadians can do to stop this from happening?
Adam or Stacey?
I think it's about I don't know, in our communities it's easier. Like we're smaller communities, so when it comes to government and what our goals are, it's like we work so closely with our leadership. So in those community engagement sessions, like I showed you, we're able to identify what we think is important and what we need to protect. So I'm not really sure what that would look like at a level, like a federal level, but that's what it is. It's getting that message across at that federal level so that legislation can speak to that and protect it.
Yeah, and I think on a practical level, if you want to put those restrictions in place, you would have to lobby the government of Nunavut and speak to Inuit communities there, find out what the feeling is if they're opposed to it, and then push for rules and regulations regulating the size of the ships, who can go where, if there's going to be any ships at all. So that's an issue you need to write to a member of parliament and lobby for that kind of change if you want to stop that from happening.
Thanks.
So I'm Cassie from SRB. What do you think or feel is the reason for the increase in global warming, or what do you think the reason for the global warming continuing to rise when we have so many alternatives nowadays is because we learn in school about pollution and UV rays and how that's helping with the rising of global warming, but we're also told, especially as youth, that we're one of the main causes for the rise with the common findings of technology and other harmful substances to the like ozone, like carbon, oil, and coal. So what do you think it is, like the main factor?
So the main factor that's keeping the global warming continuing to be a problem?
Yeah.
I think it's more like humans don't like change. We really don't like it. We really don't like, especially when it affects our money. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of powerful interests that stand to do well if they continue, if things continue the way it is, and they lobby for that. The problem is that it doesn't take into a long-term solution. It doesn't take into a long-term anything. It's just short-term gains. So I think the biggest problem moving forward is that we have to change a lot of minds on a global scale. And it's not just like our own country, it's every country. All countries need to work together. we can do stuff from the ground up, and that's a massive, working on from both angles. We can do stuff from the ground up, but it also needs to be an international approach. So it's, slow to change, I think, is what it is.
Okay, thanks.
All right, on here.
Hi, I'm from CB, and I was just wondering if we were to reduce resource consumption, wouldn't that affect international economic trades with other countries, especially those who we consider as third world?
I'm not sure. Well, I guess, yeah, there is a piece of reducing the amount, but it's not about stopping it. It's about doing it sustainably, right? So there are ways, and there are ways that you guys will be able to come up with through innovation on how we can continue to utilize what Mother Earth provides, but we have to do it in such a way that we're protecting. Right? So I'm not about stopping. That's not something like, I encourage economic development in my communities, because without it, how are we supposed to service our people, right? They deserve access to health care and employment and education. So we do need it, but let's do it sustainably.
All right, last question.
All right. So my name is Mo. I'm from SRB, and it's not really I didn't do any research, so this is mainly going to be about culture, and I just want to ask Stacey how has energy consumption affected Aboriginal traditions and rituals and stuff.
So I guess I guess things like pipelines, right? They can impact our fish resource, which is a major traditional practice for our people. The pollution, the greenhouse gases, and that have created climate change have put impacts on our traditional practices, also hunting and harvesting our medicinals and the food that our people used to rely on. They're noticing that things are blooming, actually, I was in a community engagement session the other day, and they said that the salmonberry were already blooming, but then we just had a major snowstorm. So the frost came, and now we're not sure if we're going to be able to harvest it this year. So I think it's kind of the bigger picture, right? What the implications of those practices are they're creating climate change, and those are the impacts that we're facing.
Do you think that if they keep getting reduced, do you think that the culture will be passed on to other generations in the future?
This is really great. So this is what I'm talking about, having to continue with economic development, because we need to be able to bring in our own source revenue, the funds, so that we can teach our youth and our elders. Our elders are telling us that they never had the opportunity to learn their culture or learn their traditional practices like basket weaving or making cedar hats. And so we need to be able to have the resources to provide that type of training to our elders and to our youth. So, so economic development's important even in our communities. We just have to make sure that we do it and we do it right.
Thank you.
So we've run out of time. I want to thank everyone for joining us today, joining us on Facebook Live, Gloucester, Colonel By, Mother Teresa, SRB. You guys have asked amazing questions today. The panelists will still be around afterwards if you didn't get a chance to talk with them. So please do go home, engage with Talk Energy Week. You'll find amazing resources online. Have conversations around your dinner table and with your friends about what each of us can do about a lower carbon future. Huge thank you to all of our panelists.